Chapter 121, The Outcome of the Sirius Incident. Professor Snape's 2-point deductions from Harry that night nearly wiped out all the points Gryffindor had earned in this year's Quidditch Cup. Gryffindor, which had already had little hope of taking the House Cup, now had none at all. Whether Snape had done it deliberately to eliminate Gryffindor so Slytherin could win was anyone's guess. Remus's earlier howl had drawn attention across the castle. Dumbledore, McGonagall, and several other professors had summoned the students to the Great Hall and were preparing to investigate when they ran into Snape and Harry returning to Hogwarts. Between Harry's account and Snape's additions, everyone soon had a rough idea of what had happened. Harry had begun to stammer, trying, poorly, to explain Remus's howl. Snape cut him off and without hesitation announced that Remus was a werewolf. Dumbledore was taken aback by the bluntness, but he did not contradict Snape. The revelation looked very much like Snape's revenge on Remus, and an obvious way to push the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor out of his post. Remus had already held the job for a year. If he stayed any longer, the ill fate long associated with that position might befall him. In those circumstances, leaving was probably the right choice. But Snape's method was crude. Dumbledore had hoped to arrange for Remus to step down on the pretext of illness, preserving some dignity. Instead, Snape's exposure guaranteed immediate disgrace. Parents would never accept a werewolf teaching their children. Worse, aside from Harry and his two friends, there was no other evidence that proved Sirius Black innocent. Sirius's warrant would stand, and Remus's having left with Sirius would make him appear complicit in Sirius's escape. The Ministry acted fast. The next day, Cornelius Fudge publicly praised Severus Snape for protecting the boy who lived, claimed Snape had driven off the fugitive Sirius Black and his supposed agent Remus Lupin hidden at Hogwarts, and pushed for Snape to receive a second-class Order of Merlin. The award failed in a subsequent vote, not because Fudge lacked the desire to honor Snape, but because Snape's past as a Death Eater made many uncomfortable. Fudge's intervention was political. He could not afford for the Ministry to be shown a laughingstock. If Sirius were innocent, the Ministry would have publicly imprisoned a man who had resisted Voldemort and allowed the true culprit to escape justice, while even awarding them honors. When he first took office, Fudge had awarded a first-class Order of Merlin in a bid to create a heroic image, partly to smooth over the messy business surrounding Peter Pettigrew and his supporters. Admitting Sirius's innocence now would undermine that image, so Fudge chose instead to dismiss Harry's account and accept Snape's version, tainted as it was by personal feeling. Harry was naturally upset, but as a student, no matter how famous, he could not go toe-to-toe with the minister. Fudge still had far more power, influence, and prestige. For the other teachers and students at Hogwarts, the outcome came with one practical silver lining. The Dementors began to withdraw. Sirius had been exposed as an animagus, and Dementors were useless against animagi. Keeping them stationed at Hogwarts would have been a waste of manpower and a public relations nightmare for the Ministry, especially given how many times the Dementors had already been rotated through. Dumbledore arranged for Sirius and Remus to be sheltered in the mountains near Hogsmeade. Remus, now a wanted man, felt less alone with Sirius at his side, and the company would make the full moon transformations easier to endure. Dumbledore sighed quietly when he thought about how things might have gone. If Sirius had revealed the truth when he was first captured, with the crime scene then still relatively intact, Dumbledore was sure he could have found the evidence to clear him. Now, knowing the truth too late, he had no choice but to wait until Peter Pettigrew reappeared in the open to prove Sirius's innocence. Dumbledore was bewildered by Sirius's earlier choices. Had Sirius not been sent to Azkaban, perhaps Arthur and Harry would have become close friends who might have altered the course of events and Dumbledore's certainty about the identity of the Chosen One. With Sirius confirmed to have resisted Voldemort and not betrayed the Potters, Dumbledore found himself less certain than before, which complicated his plans. Arthur had no strong opinion on the matter and deliberately stayed out of it. He did not want to alter his understanding of future developments just to see Sirius's name cleared a little sooner. He felt no personal attachment to Sirius, and had already done what he believed he should for family. There were still a few days before the holidays, and Arthur had other business. He needed to enter Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets and kill the basilisk. The entrance was in the girls' bathroom on the second floor. Normally, one had only to speak open in Parseltongue to a faucet carved with a small snake to reveal the passage. Arthur could not speak Parseltongue, but he knew alchemy. The mechanism that opened the chamber was an alchemical device. Charms would eventually fade, but alchemical tools could endure for generations, and the snake-engraved faucet had been constructed that way. Using his knowledge, Arthur quickly deciphered the mechanism designed for Parseltongue. He dismantled the magic circle around the snake carving, and the hidden passage opened. A dark, black pipe, originally part of the castle's drainage system, now led down into Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets. Arthur wasted no time. From a pocket, he produced 30 Dementors he had trained himself. These Dementors could barely understand his commands, but under Arthur's instruction, they would scout ahead. He was not willing to risk descending first and stumbling straight into a foraging basilisk. Once the Dementors reported back that the way below was clear, Arthur jumped down into the passage. Further down, the passage widened noticeably, changing from a tight stone pipe into a proper tunnel. The floor was strewn with small animal bones, mostly rats, and the shed skin of a giant basilisk lay folded against one wall. A Dementor led the way. Arthur followed behind. After several twists and turns, they came to a solid stone door carved with two intertwined snakes, their eyes set with large, glittering emeralds. Using the same method he had applied to read the magic within the emeralds, the Dementor, acting on Arthur's command, slid through the gap the door opened. Arthur hung back and used his magic to sense into the chamber beyond. This was the true Chamber of Secrets. 2 rows of stone pillars wrapped in coiling serpents stood in the long, low room, and a strange greenish vapor glowed faintly in the air. At the far end loomed a statue of Salazar Slytherin, the height of the room itself, pressed against the back wall. Its mouth was a cavern, and the basilisk normally dwelt within it. Perhaps the statue had heard the disturbance. Its mouth yawned open, and the basilisk slid out. Its eyes were closed at first. Only when its whole body had emerged did it open them to look around. It froze, clearly surprised. Creatures stared straight into its gaze and did not die or turn to stone. These floating beings began to close in on it. Arthur's perception confirmed what he had suspected. The Dementors were immune to the basilisk's killing stare. The single, gaping mouth of a Dementor was not an eye at all, but a void that fed on joy and souls. He ordered them forward. The Dementors surrounded the beast and began to feed. The basilisk, baffled by a pain it could not localize, developed a pounding headache. It bit and snapped at the floating creatures, but its attacks passed through them as if they were nothing. Touching them only made the pain worse. Venom, too, had no effect. Desperate, it rolled toward the statue's mouth, the only place it could flee to, but before it reached the passage, something heavy slammed down on its tail. Arthur had summoned a unicorn with a spell he called Soul Guardian. The unicorn, crackling with lightning, crushed the basilisk's tail beneath its hoof. The serpent's roar became a frantic thrash. As it screamed, one of the Dementors drifted into its open mouth and from within broke through the basilisk's soul defenses. They fed until the struggle stopped. The basilisk fell utterly still. Its breathing ceased. The Dementors had consumed the creature's soul, leaving only its corpse. The beast died without ever seeing the face of the one who had killed it. Possibly it did not even know why it had perished. Arthur stepped through the doorway and stood behind the carcass. He placed a live chicken before the motionless head and with his wand forced the basilisk's eyes open. The eyes, even in death, stared. The chicken caught that gaze, gave a brief, urgent cluck, and its neck snapped. It died immediately. Arthur allowed himself a small, eager thrill. The basilisk's gaze still worked, at least while the eyes remained in the skull. He still needed to know whether an eye removed from the body would retain that power, but first he had to process the corpse. Everything about it was valuable. Beyond the eyes, the fangs were the most prized parts, strong enough, it was said, to destroy Horcruxes. The fangs were enormous, like short, deadly daggers that could, if adapted, become formidable close combat weapons, though wizards rarely fought with blades when wands were the norm. The horn, too, was precious. Salazar Slytherin's wand had been fashioned from basilisk horn. The skin combined exceptional magical resistance with surprising lightness. Arthur took the corpse and the shed skin he had found in the passage back to the room of requirement. There he stripped the body of every useful part except for the intact pair of eyes. He also reset the chamber's visible mechanisms before he left, but only the appearance was restored. The inner magic arrays were destroyed. Even if Lord Voldemort himself stood here and spoke Parseltongue, the Chamber of Secrets would no longer open. Back in the room, Arthur removed a single eye to see whether a detached eye's power remained intact. As he had feared, the isolated eye was much weaker. The test chicken had to meet the eye twice before it died. That suggested the basilisk's gaze had already diminished with death, a loss too subtle to detect with a common bird. Determining the exact strength of the eye now would require trials on creatures with great vitality or substantial magical power, experiments he would postpone until he had access to such subjects. A few days later, the end-of-year feast arrived. With Snape's heavy deductions and Dumbledore's generous awards, Slytherin unsurprisingly reclaimed the House Cup, finishing with an astonishing 637 points. Ravenclaw came in second with only 457. Snape's face never relaxed into a smile. Whether that was because Slytherin had won again or because of something else that had happened 2 days earlier was hard to tell. When Lupin had turned werewolf, Snape had used Sectum Sempra and opened a deep gash in his arm. Even after Lupin shifted back into human form, the wound bled profusely. Dumbledore had insisted Snape treat the injury when he next took potions to the hospital wing. Snape complied, cursing under his breath all the while and muttering the counter-curses for Sectum Sempra as he worked. Sirius had to swallow his anger. He had never seen the man so restrained. Snape, for his part, felt an unusual private satisfaction. 123. Two Little Thunderbirds. The day after the end-of-year feast became a holiday, Arthur returned to Black Manor. That summer, he planned to raise a pair of Thunderbirds on the estate, partly to bring life back to the manor, and partly because Thunderbirds could complement his own magic. With the persuasive power of his money, Cornelius Fudge, who was short on funds, immediately agreed. He instructed the Ministry of Magic to establish a Thunderbird breeding base near Black Manor. Thunderbird breeding facilities had long existed in the United States, but this was the first time Britain would have one. In the States, wizards often use Thunderbird tail feathers as wand cores. Wands made with those feathers are notoriously difficult to master, but in the right hands they are very powerful, often suited to transfiguration. The American breeders already had proven methods, so Arthur simply copied their model, and a small base for 2 Thunderbirds went up quickly. Raising Thunderbirds was not particularly difficult, provided they could be kept under control and fed. Arthur set aside a large pasture and assigned Fudibats to act as herding animals, a kind of sheepdog, to keep the livestock moving. Animals that grazed constantly produced better quality meat and in future would feed both the Thunderbirds and the Fudibats. They would also serve as meat for Arthur when needed. A few days after the base was finished, 2 Thunderbird eggs arrived at Black Manor. They were enormous, larger than ostrich eggs, their shells golden and patterned, like carved gold. The chicks inside were already well formed, and the breeders could determine their sexes by magic, so Arthur bought 1 male and 1 female, intending for them to breed on British soil. Thunderbirds are among the most powerful magical creatures. If ranked strictly by strength among non-extinct beings, they would be in the top 5. They combine brute power with flight and possess an acute sense of danger. For ambush predators that favor darkness, like werewolves, Thunderbirds can sense the risk and avoid traps. They are closely related to phoenixes in temperament and do not habitually attack wizards, so their danger rating is only XXX. Arthur placed the 2 giant eggs in the incubation room. Thunderbird feathers reflect sunlight like gold, and the eggs require a great deal of light while incubating. Arthur's chamber used hundreds of mirrors to focus sunlight on the shells, a technique learned from American breeders, and strict temperature controls kept them warm at night with fluff and other insulation. Following the manual closely, Arthur began to watch the eggs. When his hand first touched a shell, he could feel life stirring within. The egg quivered in response. Arthur decided to experiment. He would channel a little of his lightning magic into the shell and see whether the developing Thunderbird would change. Despite their name, Thunderbirds do not generate lightning themselves. They create stormy weather through the vibrations of their special wings while flying. Arthur wanted to know whether he could alter that, perhaps enabling one to generate or store lightning or channel it from clouds. He started cautiously. The first pulse of magic was tiny, the kind of energy that might lift a single sheet of paper a meter off the table, and he watched for a reaction. The egg did not merely respond, it seemed delighted. It trembled with a joyful vibration. Encouraged, Arthur increased the flow bit by bit, then stopped. The chick inside still shuddered happily. It did not seem to know when to stop feeding on the magic. Arthur was careful. Too much lightning might overheat or cook the egg. He treated the second egg the same, but with a different current. Where the first received yang lightning, the second received yin lightning. Arthur stayed at Black Manor for almost a month to oversee their incubation, postponing his trip to France to look for Fleur. He visited the incubation room every day, pouring measured doses of lightning into the shells. After so much interaction, the chicks seemed to recognize him. The eggs would begin to shake the moment he laid a hand on them, even before he sent any magic. Tiny cracks appeared on the shells in the last days, lines widening until membranes and a dark shape were visible inside. Then, on the 33rd day at noon, the clear sky suddenly went overcast. 2 bolts of lightning streaked down and struck the incubation room, lighting the nest brighter than day. The strokes seemed to trigger a final surge of energy. The chicks inside thrashed and pushed, and the shells split open under Arthur's watch. When the birds finally emerged, the air thrummed with 2 distinct, potent magical signatures. The sky's lightning seemed to resonate with them, intertwining and flashing as if celebrating the births. The newborns opened their eyes and cried out skyward. A light drizzle began to fall as if the world answered their calls. They were still damp, bodies slick with fluids, but short down had already grown. The lightning Arthur had fed them had left clear marks. Normally, a thunderbird's plumage is rich gold from head to tail, yet these 2 were markedly different. The bird that had taken yang lightning, the male, had down of a pale gold, and the crest feathers on his head were pure white. The female, infused with yin lightning, looked almost like a different species. Her down was entirely black, and only her eyes retained a golden gleam. Arthur wasn't sure whether the yin lightning had simply overwhelmed her coloration or whether the change would prove to be something more profound. At the moment, she looked almost like a small crow. 124. Inflated Vampire. The 2 hatchlings began making soft ooh-ooh noises at Arthur as soon as they broke from their eggs. After pecking away the last bits of shell, they wobbled to their feet and tottered toward him. When Arthur stroked them gently, they nuzzled and pecked his hand with an affectionate familiarity. Thunderbirds, like dragonlings, are tiny at first, but grow astonishingly fast. For the first week, Arthur fed them nothing but milk, goat's milk, and then, in only 7 days, they had already reached the size of medium dogs. Their down had given way to real feathers, and their appearance had shifted from the fragile hatchling look to something more defined. Arthur gave them names. He'd thought of Thunder God and Lightning Mother, but those sounded odd in Britain, so he chose names of gods associated with lightning. Zeus for the male and Hera for the female. Zeus grew a bit larger than Hera, and his feather tips had turned pure white, fading from light gold at the base. Hera's feathers took on a golden sheen, edged with a ring of downy gold and a crest tipped in bright gold. With her smaller frame, she looked both noble and mysterious. As they matured, they could no longer live on milk. Arthur started feeding them basilisk meat, gallbladders, hearts. Anything from a large basilisk would accelerate the young Thunderbird's growth. He had altered them with his lightning magic, and he wanted to give them the best start possible. After the hatchlings grew strong enough, Arthur brought them to France. He stayed a week at his uncle's home as usual, then went to the Delacour household. The little birds were fearless. Whether at his uncle's or at the Delacours, they ran everywhere, pecking and exploring. They accepted Fleur and Gabrielle's attention readily, so long as there was meat involved. After a while, Fleur rose, hugged Arthur, and teased, "Arthur, you've grown so tall." He slid an arm around her slender waist. He had shot up over the year, almost 1.7 meters tall, and still more than a month from his 14th birthday, only slightly shorter than Fleur. He suspected his frequent practice of lightning magic had accelerated both his magical power and his physical development. Gabrielle, watching the two of them, pouted. Arthur always stole her sister, but she brightened at the sight of the birds, especially the dark one with gold accents. "Arthur," she asked hopefully, looking up, "can I have the little black one? I'll take such good care of it." Arthur shook his head. Zeus and Hera weren't pets to be handed off. They'd been altered by magic and could develop unpredictably. Thunderbirds grow enormous in a year, and if something dangerous happened when they matured, no young girl could handle it. "Not now," he said. "If they have chicks in the future, I'll give you one." Gabrielle's disappointment faded into a shy, flushing hope as she glanced between the birds and the couple. Perhaps Fleur would have children one day, and then Gabrielle would have both to play with. Fleur let Gabrielle stay and play with the hatchlings while she pulled Arthur into her room and said, "I have a surprise for you." "Do I need to close my eyes?" he asked. "Of course not." Fleur produced a letter from her drawer. It came from Madame Olympe Maxime, headmistress of Beauxbatons. Arthur's chest tightened with a small regret. He had hoped he might be old enough. He read the letter. Fleur leaned against his arm, smiling. "She says the 3 great European schools are resuming the Triwizard Tournament next year, after centuries. Hogwarts will host, so I'll be attending school there the whole year with you." Of course, the tournament wouldn't mean every pupil was uprooted. Beauxbatons would send a small delegation, selected champions among them. The letter hinted that Fleur was likely to be chosen as Beauxbatons' champion, so she would probably be part of their team at Hogwarts. The news made Arthur realize how time had slipped by. But the tournament was not what occupied his mind most. Voldemort's resurrection was scheduled to happen during the Triwizard Tournament. When that occurred, the British wizarding world would be thrown into chaos again. Fleur noticed his brow knit and squeezed his hand. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," he said with a small smile. "Just that something bad might happen during the tournament. Stay close to me then." "Okay." She didn't press him further. She trusted there was a reason he wasn't saying more. They spent the rest of the summer inseparable. The Delacours managed, they worked at the ministry, and so had little time off, often coming home late, sometimes working through the tourist-heavy summer evenings, but Gabrielle kept up her teasing about Arthur stealing her sister. Fortunately, the 2 hatchlings kept her company and soothed her complaints. After a week, Arthur sensed a change in the air around the Delacours' home. The young Thunderbirds, with instincts of their own, grew restless, picking up occasional threads of malice. Because he was in France, he didn't act immediately. That evening, when the Delacours returned from the ministry, they brought news from the department. Last summer, during Arthur's holiday, he had killed a group of vampires in Paris. Among them was a vampire named Klein, second in standing only to the 3 ancient vampire elders, who had been a representative of the neutral conservative faction. Klein believed that vampires could not win a war against wizards and had tried to avoid provoking conflict. Over the past 2 years, the vampire and werewolf communities, stirred by certain forces, had become more restless. The appearance of a werewolf-vampire hybrid had sent vampire scientists scrambling to understand and replicate the phenomenon, and some vampires had grown stronger for it. Klein had led an expedition to Paris to capture that hybrid, hoping to prevent the radicals from forcing a confrontation near one of the wizarding world's key cities. That was one reason the vampire damage in Paris had been less than that caused by werewolves. But Arthur had killed Klein. Without him to mediate between conservative and radical factions, the vampires had grown uncontrolled. After their scientists discovered how hybrids could exist, the radicals became cocky. Some even began to believe they could defeat wizards in single combat. Klein's former followers and other extremist vampires saw Arthur's presence in Paris, outside the relative safety of Britain, as an opportunity. They wanted to kill him, both to avenge Klein and to prove the vampire's newfound strength. Arthur listened and could only think that those vampires were overconfident. 125. The French Ministry of Magic is ready to give in. Arthur breathed a sigh of relief when he learned that the people outside had been sent by the vampires. He had been wary of the mastermind who had manipulated both vampires and werewolves during his last visit to Paris, not of the vampires themselves, who lacked true combat prowess. Even if vampires had mastered hybridization with werewolves and grown much stronger, they still stood little chance against powerful wizards. Alexander Corvinus, the ancestor of modern werewolves and vampires, had been little more than a guinea pig when confronted by wizards. The so-called vampire-werewolf hybrids were merely a closer approximation of that bloodline, with only minor bat and wolf traits added. Those bats and wolves were ordinary animals, not magical beasts. In short, the hybrids might be stronger than an average wizard, but they could not reach the ceiling of power held by the likes of Dumbledore, and they probably couldn't even match the deans of Hogwarts. Compared to wizards, the vampires' main advantage was their infection ability, which could recruit muggles and build overwhelming numbers. But this was France, not Britain, and Arthur had to think about the international ramifications. "Mr. Delacour, how does the French Ministry of Magic plan to handle this?" he asked. Mr. Delacour looked uncomfortable. The ministry's position is that the vampires and werewolves are causing a disturbance, but as long as they don't launch an active attack, the ministry will at most send aurors to drive them off. Is that the minister's stance? Yes, the newly appointed minister doesn't want to sour relations with the vampires. Muggle technology is advancing fast. Many muggles have already captured evidence of vampires and werewolves. The minister believes preserving the statute of secrecy is more important than provoking a full conflict. Very well, I won't be the one to provoke them. Delacour nodded. I'll report to the ministry tomorrow. You're absolutely safe here in my home. That evening, Fleur took Arthur's hand with regret. It's a shame. We won't be able to go out and enjoy the summer. That's not necessarily true. Arthur smiled and stared at the dark window. There were a number of vampires watching the house from outside, and a few aurors were posted to guard against them. From his conversation with Mr. Delacour, the new French minister was clearly a staunch supporter of the statute of secrecy. Even if allowing the vampires to run loose endangered Arthur and the wider wizarding world, the minister preferred to make concessions to avoid exposing wizards to muggles. Wizards could win a war against vampires, possibly even with werewolves added, but an open war would inevitably reveal their existence to the Muggle world. Unless Dumbledore personally intervened and single-handedly eliminated the vampire leadership, and Dumbledore wouldn't agree to that, the minister's choice was to tolerate limited vampire activity to keep the statute intact. Under those circumstances, the moment Arthur left the Delacour estate, vampire radicals might put him under siege. In the past, he might have retreated to Britain or stayed hidden, but he no longer intended to hide. His last visit to Paris had already made many wizards aware of his abilities. He was no longer anonymous. Since the vampires wanted him dead, he planned to strike first. It might also help him find the mastermind who had manipulated them before. Fleur's expression changed. "Arthur, are you planning something?" He didn't hide his intentions. He would need Fleur's help to conceal his movements later. "Yes, I want to hit the vampires first, show those arrogant creatures why wizards rule the magical world. Their numbers mean nothing against absolute power." Fleur hesitated. "But there are so many. My father said there are at least 1 million vampires gathered in Eastern Europe, not counting the even greater number of blood slaves." The numerical imbalance explained why so many wizards were reluctant to take action. Several small towns in Eastern Europe had become vampire enclaves. No muggles left, only vampires and blood slaves. The French auror force numbered fewer than 100. If aurors were sent to exterminate vampires, casualties would be catastrophic. Vampires were willing to trade 1,000 of their number for a single auror. It cost far less to breed a vampire than to train a qualified wizard. Unless vampires did something that was blatantly unacceptable to the wizarding majority, the French ministry, without the minister's backing, would not wage large-scale war against them. After the last Paris incident, the International Conference of Wizards had only managed to impose fines and demand the surrender of rogue vampires and werewolves. Arthur had no intention of taking on all the vampires. That would be impossible, even with unlimited effort. He needed Fleur to help hide his trail and keep vampire attention fixed on Paris rather than on their stronghold. Like aurors among wizards, the vampires' elite fighters, the Deathwalkers, were few in number. If most of the Deathwalkers were in Paris preparing to besiege him, there would be far fewer left at the vampire stronghold. "Don't worry," Arthur said, squeezing Fleur's hand. "I'm only going to take out a few vampires to establish my authority, then talk to some of the elders. I've learned apparition. I can get away if it goes wrong." "All right, I'll go with you." "No, let my father go instead. I haven't learned apparition yet." "Baru will be with me. Don't worry. And don't tell your father about this. There are people in the French ministry who, for the sake of the statute, might hand my whereabouts over to the vampires." The next morning, Arthur packed and prepared to leave. The vampire stronghold lay in Romania, and the 3 vampire elders lived there. With Fleur's help covering his tracks, Arthur had Baru take him to Brasov. As a city on the edge of the vampire territories, vampires were a common sight on Brasov's streets. Walk around at night, and you might find that 2 out of 10 people were vampires, and 7 were blood slaves. Nearby loomed Brown Castle, also known as Dracula's Castle, the residence of the 3 vampire elders. 126. The 3 elders of the vampires. Arthur arrived at Brown Castle in the afternoon. The sun's rays broke through the clouds, baking the vampires like a fierce fire. Vampires did not instantly die in sunlight, but it made them painfully uncomfortable. The bloodline vampires were even more vulnerable. Sunlight for them was like touching red-hot iron. Because of this, Brown Castle's defenses were thin at the moment. Arthur left Baru waiting behind him and walked up to the main gate. A few vampires stood on the other side, umbrellas raised against the sun. They watched him warily, and one of them called out, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Arthur pulled a slim wand tipped with unicorn horn from his pocket and held it up. "Don't you recognize me? Aren't you supposed to be trying to kill me?" The lead vampire froze, then his expression turned to alarm. "Arthur Black?" "That's right," Arthur said. "You sent a few trashy lackeys to Paris to look for me. That was a mistake. If one of your elders wanted to meet me, they should have come in person. Now that would be a fair match. Since you didn't, I came here myself to see if you vampires really have the strength to challenge a wizard." The lead vampire's face went white. He shoved his subordinates forward and sprinted into the castle to summon reinforcements. He knew Arthur's reputation. He had single-handedly killed dozens of vampires recently, and he was a newly turned vampire who couldn't handle a powerful wizard. Arthur watched him go with mild interest. It was a good way to draw out the elders without searching for them himself. The few vampires left at the gate weren't so lucky. With a flick of his wrist, Arthur unleashed a whip woven from white lightning that sliced through the gate and the vampires standing there. When he stepped past the broken iron, a circular ring formed around him, black with interwoven red threads. It was a defensive magic array made of yin lightning, an imitation of Grindelwald's so-called gas stove lightning shield that Arthur had developed long ago. This was the first time he had used it in real combat. At the same time, his magic defense necklace activated at its most sensitive setting. Magic defenses and enchanted items combined to blunt any incoming attack. The commotion drew every vampire in Brown Castle out into the sunlight. The 3 vampire elders were roused as well by the leader who had run inside. Unlike some courts that claimed 4 elders, the vampires truly had only 3. Marcus, the most powerful, and 2 others, Amelia and Damon Sterling. Marcus was the son of Alexander Corvinus. He didn't possess an almost infinite lifespan like the progenitor and had been resting for centuries, only awakened when succession required it. Arthur's direct attack had forced him to rouse. The other 2 elders had no fixed hierarchy between them. Amelia was once a princess who joined the vampires after her father was killed. She had been turned by Marcus 99 years ago and had served as an elder ever since. Klein, whom Arthur had killed, had once coveted her position. Damon Sterling, a black man, had been elected elder during the last succession 49 years ago. Marcus was still feeding to recover his strength, so Amelia and Damon arrived first. They approached Arthur, questions and accusations already forming on their lips. Their priority was to delay and buy time for Marcus to finish gathering his strength. They also feared other wizards might be hiding nearby and were likely dispatching vampires to search. Arthur ignored their questions and fixed his gaze on Damon. "You're one of the vampire elders?" Damon sized him up and replied through gritted teeth. "Yes, I am." Arthur twirled the white lightning whip in his hand and struck the ground so it crackled. "I always pictured vampires as old, stern sticklers," he said. "I didn't expect you lot to be so democratic. The United States still hasn't had a black president, you know." Several of the older, stern vampires bristled at the remark. They were well over 100 years old, raised in a different time when Damon's position would have been scandalous. In recent decades, though, the influence of black werewolves and vampires had grown. Black bodies often provided the physical combat prowess prized by vampire society. So Damon's rise, while controversial to some, was a reality now. Damon stared at the lightning whip, something in his expression souring. He let out a roar. "You little wizards dare come to our stronghold alone? Do you take us for fools?" Arthur waved his hand toward the gate. "Don't get me wrong, I didn't come alone." "There are others?" Damon sneered. "Are the wizards declaring war on us now? We are not the vampires of old. We will win this war." Arthur laughed. "If you truly thought you could beat wizards, why are you waiting here? The lower vampires might not know, but you elders must have seen the power of great wizards. I'm not even talking about all of them. You must have seen Dumbledore and Grindelwald. So show me how you plan to defeat them." Damon's face creased with anger. "You." He stomped the ground, fangs extending as his features flushed. Then he charged. Arthur watched his speed and compared it to Kleina, the vampire he had encountered before. The elders were indeed stronger. Marcus's lineage had improved them, but it still wasn't enough. In the past, Arthur had needed fragments of the Philosopher's Stone to slaughter vampires. In the last year, his strength had grown dramatically. His magic power had risen from 2,000 to 869. Nearly 3,000 total power was ample against ordinary vampires. More importantly, his months of focused study on lightning magic had given him far greater control over that element. 127, a vampire paralyzed by electricity. Damon Sterling charged forward while Arthur lashed out with the long white whip in his hand. The Yang lightning style favored speed and lethality. The vampires simply couldn't match its swiftness. Before Damon could close the gap, the whip, crackling with electric arcs, sent him flying, leaving a faint scorch along his body. Damon's assault had been the signal. More than a dozen Deathwalkers spilled from the shadows to surround Arthur. Their faces were sallow under the afternoon sun. Their eyes brimmed with murderous intent. As Deathwalkers, they were the Vampire Council's elite, chosen for their skill, and they were wary after seeing Arthur fling an elder aside. Still, numbers mattered. Nearly 1,000 vampires were inside the castle now, and the ones before Arthur were well above average. One wizard against 1,000 vampires should have been a hopeless fight. Arthur showed no fear. He kept his wand in his left hand, and with his right, drew out dozens of black iron shards from his pack. He charged them with Yang lightning and scattered them in all directions. 2 vampires were unlucky. Pieces pierced their throats, and they crumpled, struggling. The others lunged for him, but they couldn't break through Arthur's lightning shield. The moment they crossed into its radius, Yin lightning tangled them and began to consume them from the inside out. In minutes, a ring of vampire corpses lay piled around him. Damon and Amelia, now standing again, watched Arthur's calm from across the lawn with faces drained pale. They had once taken his youth for a weakness. Seeing him slaughter so many confirmed otherwise. Even diminished by sunlight, wiping out dozens at once was no small feat. "Let the half-breeds loose," Damon said to Amelia. "A good chance to test them." Amelia nodded, tapped her walkie-talkie, and issued a few terse commands. A moment later, a thunderous boom came from beneath the castle. A massive gate split open on the lawn, and hundreds of bulky figures poured out. Each stood nearly 3 meters tall, coated in gray fur but mostly bald on top. Their faces were odd, long muzzles not as pronounced as a werewolf's, and 4 protruding canine teeth that made them grotesque. These were half-breeds of vampire and werewolf, unstable hybrids that couldn't shift forms fully, trapped in a monstrous in-between. Their looks were ugly, but their strength vastly outmatched ordinary vampires. Arthur simply summoned a soul guardian with a wave of his wand and called forth a unicorn. He hadn't used any Philosopher's Stone fragments this time, so the unicorn's lightning aura was weaker than on previous occasions. But vampires had no strong defenses, and this incarnation was more than enough. He handed control of the unicorn to Charlotte and studied the two elders, Damon and Amelia. He'd come for them. They had to die. He switched the wand into his right hand and poured magic through it. The lightning at the wand's tip reshaped. Arthur's improved control let him craft it into a straight, blazing sword. The white arcs along it shone far brighter than the whip had before. He intended to fight with his own power and avoid using the Philosopher's Stone fragments. He could not become dependent on them, especially with some greater crisis still looming, and the fragments promised to him by Nicolas Flamel, reserved for that unknown necessity. In particular, Marcus, the vampire progenitor, had not yet shown himself. Arthur didn't know exactly how strong Marcus was and wanted to conserve his reserves. Behind him, Charlotte rode the unicorn into the fray. As a remnant soul of a unicorn, under her command, the soul guardian was almost a living beast and stronger than most real unicorns. The creature's coat crackled with lightning that, when it struck, burned through the half-breed's thick fur and struck at their organs, instantly paralyzing them. Charlotte, experienced at directing soul guardians, blended the unicorn's natural strikes with the guardian's electric power. The unicorn reared, its front hooves gathered lightning. With a sudden spread of wings, it leapt into the mass of half-breeds and slammed its hooves down like Thor's hammer. Lightning ripped across the cracked earth, freezing more than 20 of the hybrids in place. Then, with its wing blades, thin, searing sheets of lightning, it swept through them, decapitating a line of the monstrous creatures. As a remnant of a creature associated with purity and life, Charlotte despised these dark, blended abominations, vampires tainted with werewolf blood. She knew their regenerative abilities could be formidable. With werewolf heritage, recovery might be even faster. To leave them a chance to revive could be disastrous. So she struck to kill, leaving no chance for regeneration. 128. Times have changed, wizard. Under the assault of the unicorns Charlotte controlled, the half-bloods the vampire leadership had pinned their hopes on proved utterly useless. Those half-bloods could barely hold off the unicorn's charges. How could they possibly swarm Arthur, the wizard who had summoned and controlled the beasts? Even when 1 or 2 half-bloods managed to breach the unicorn's ranks, they could do nothing against Arthur's lightning shield. They were easily entangled by the yin lightning tentacles that extended from the black ring, then cut down. Unconcerned, Arthur stepped out of the shield's circular range, long sword of yang lightning in hand. He reached out with his left and easily located the black iron pieces in front of 2 senior vampires, Damon Sterling and Amelia. Alchemical devices he had made to enable his flying thunder god technique. After sensing the iron, Arthur vanished at once and reappeared directly in front of Damon Sterling. The lightning sword, blazing white, slashed for his neck. Damon Sterling was an elite among elites. His physical strength outmatched a wizard's. He leaned back and slipped out of the sword's path. Arthur only smiled. His sword was not fixed in length. The instant the tip pointed at Damon, he increased his magical output. The surge destabilized the blade's form, but the tip shot forward under Arthur's control, piercing Damon's neck. With a twist of his body, the sword cleaved through half of Damon's throat and then drove on to another vampire. After taking down one, Arthur flashed 4 more times. By the time the other vampires recovered and tried to strike, Arthur had vanished again, returning to the safety of the lightning shield. Nearly 20 vampires lay dead. Damon, clutching at his neck, staggered back and pressed himself against the wall. Blood flowed from the wound, but vampires can control their own blood. He held the wound tight, and the escaping blood stayed within the severed vessels in midair instead of spilling out. Arthur watched quietly from a distance. He wanted to gauge how potent a vampire elder's healing was. As long as it wasn't monstrous, Wolverine-style regeneration, he was fine. Under Arthur's eyes, Damon's neck wound slowly closed, but it did not knit instantly. It took a minute before he could take his hand away, and a scar still lingered. It seemed Marcus's recovery ability might be only marginally stronger than Damon's. Nearby, the unicorn Charlotte controlled walked up to Arthur's side. All of the more than 100 half-blood vampires had been dealt with, though much of the lightning on the unicorn's body had been spent. Arthur replenished some of its magic. His panel showed a total 2 Hot Ming before. After expenditure and topping up the unicorn, he had remaining, probably enough for the remaining vampires. A wizard's magic recovered quickly. If the vampires were stalling, he was doing the same. As he stopped actively outputting magic, his body absorbed ambient magic, and the number climbed. 20-20-20-34, 20-45. Damon finally rose after his wound healed, eyes wide with fear as he watched Arthur from behind his men. He'd almost died. Luck and his own strength, letting him hold his head steady, had bought time to recuperate. Amelia, standing beside him, kept scanning the black iron pieces in front of them and called out, "Is it those black iron pieces that let you keep using apparition like that?" Arthur didn't deny it. It was obvious enough. Anyone looking around the fallen would have noticed them. He looked at Amelia and said, "You know about a wizard's magic? Even so, do you dare touch those pieces?" "Why wouldn't I?" Amelia replied. "Noble wizard, you must have forgotten. We vampires have our own magic." She drew a small blade, cut her palm, and controlled her blood to flow out. The blood extended like a tentacle and wrapped around a black iron piece. A flicker of amusement passed through Arthur's face. An electric white arc sparked in his eyes. The piece Amelia gripped overloaded. What had been a dead chunk of metal erupted with arcs of lightning that raced down the blood tentacle toward Amelia. In an instant, she was paralyzed, convulsing like the half-bloods had earlier. Arthur had built a safeguard into the pieces. He'd placed magic-storing gems inside them. He could turn any piece into a bomb to instantly release lightning, rendering it unusable for positioning afterwards. But for now, it served as a defensive trigger. Damon ripped off his garments and slashed at the blood tentacles, cutting Amelia free. When he reached to support her, he felt the lightning deepen her flesh and drew back, numbness forcing Amelia to collapse. By the time he helped her up again, Arthur had already used Flying Thunder God to cut down the vampires crowding around the other iron pieces. Watching Arthur move freely through the castle, Damon snapped, "What do you think you're doing? You've killed so many of our people. You're trying to start a war between vampires and wizards?" Arthur regarded him with cold amusement. "You tried to kill me first. You came for me, so I came for you. This is just a question of who's stronger. What's wrong with that?" Damon had no answer. Arthur continued, "Or were you so confident before that you sat back in your castle enjoying yourselves? Now that you find you can't beat me, suddenly you complain that I'm in the wrong and cry war." Damon took a breath. "Black, don't be too smug. You're only one person. Even if we all die, you won't survive." Arthur laughed. He had been a little worried before coming, but after facing these elite elders and the half-blood rabble, what could 1,000+ vampires in the castle do? He'd already killed some of them, and under his perception, only about 700 remained. Even without Dumbledore, if McGonagall arrived and put her master-level transfiguration to work, these vampires could be handled without rest and without injury. The other vampires weren't wizards and couldn't teleport. The nearest vampire settlement was more than 30 kilometers away. By the time reinforcements were alerted and arrived, most in the castle would be dead. Arthur had also arranged for Baru outside the gate. Baru could set numerous traps in the time it took to send the alarm. House elves were frighteningly capable. Without formal magic training, they could stand against adult wizards skilled in practical combat. Some poorly trained adult wizards might not even defeat a house elf. Seeing Arthur so unshaken, Damon asked a nearby vampire, "How long until Marcus wakes?" The vampire hesitated. "Maybe 10 more minutes?" "Why so long?" Damon hissed, angry enough not to care if Arthur heard. The progenitor was supposed to awaken during the Elder re-election next year. Because of this emergency awakening, the stored blood of magical creatures is insufficient. They're currently feeding the progenitor with the first half-blood we captured earlier, so it's going to take longer. Damon looked to Amelia, another elder. We have no choice. Call Selena. Get her Deathwalkers here. Firearms might stall Black. Amelia nodded and sent a subordinate to summon Selena. Selena was the Deathwalker's deadliest warrior. Expert in cold weapons, proficient with firearms, and she'd trained a small unit skilled with guns. Damon's hope was that Selena's team could hold Arthur long enough for the progenitor Marcus to fully awaken. Soon, vampires in black trench coats appeared throughout the castle, all aiming guns at Arthur. Damon, hiding behind his subordinates, bellowed, "Times have changed, wizard. This is no longer the Stone Age when you wizards ruled alone. Try these weapons the Muggles invented that forced you to sign the Statute of Secrecy." Wonder 29. The powerful defensive ability of the Iron Armor spell. Firearms were deadly for the Muggles who invented them, and they were dangerous to wizards as well. Their range and velocity far outmatched most wizarding charms. A Muggle shooter hidden from sight could cripple or even kill a wizard before the wizard had a chance to react. But a wizard with prepared defenses could shrug off ordinary bullets. That was why the vampires had taken up sniper rifles, stationed at windows all over the castle, each gun aimed at Arthur and ready to fire. Arthur had expected firearms. Unlike most wizards, who kept wary but distant ties to the Muggle world, vampires had burrowed deeply into it over the past century. They lived everywhere. Tanks and cannons would not be beyond their reach if they chose. He had sensed 10 vampires with guns in the castle and memorized their positions. A shot cracked. A long projectile screamed toward Arthur's head, but it struck an invisible barrier 2 meters out and stopped. Under the impact, a faint white glow flickered on the surface. Arthur's lightning shield had been built on the shield charm, so it carried the charm's protections. After a 1-second standoff, the bullet lost momentum and slid to the floor with a soft metallic clink. The round hadn't hurt him, but the shield had sapped 100 points of his magic. A few more shots like that, and his reserves would be depleted. He raised his wand and began to chant. A white mist seeped from its tip and spread outward. Firearms were among the primary Muggle weapons of the age, and some wizards had developed countermeasures. This was one of them, a mist woven from wizarding art and the ambient magic of the natural world. Enhanced by his lightning currents, it could almost completely blind Muggle detection. Thermal scopes, optics, electronic guidance, leaving only a wizard's own mental tracking intact. As the mist rolled through the halls, the snipers lost their aim. They switched tactics, rocket launchers, grenades, but none could find Arthur through the haze. Above the castle, the sky itself changed. What had been clear dimmed, dark clouds swirled, and arcs of electricity crawled through them. Damon Sterling watched the shifting weather with unease. The fog was Arthur's doing. It hid the dazzling sunlight, which was in some ways a boon for the vampires. They were not werewolves who needed moonlight, but sunlight weakened them. Even so, Damon did not dare provoke Arthur. There was something frightening about this young wizard, different from the ordinary adults Damon had faced. The only person who had stirred such dread in him before was Marcus, the ancestor. A unicorn suddenly burst from the mist and charged through the vampire ranks. Its ethereal form, amplified by Arthur's lightning, moved faster than any living unicorn would. It tore through their lines. Its horn reaped vampire lives with relentless precision. The vampires, powerful though they were, could not escape its pursuit, especially with Arthur having already marked their positions. Within minutes, the unicorn found Damon Sterling. He tried to flee and didn't even use his powers to resist, performing worse than Kleine, who wasn't even an elder. One lunge later, the unicorn's horn pierced his neck and held him there, watching his blood ebb away. Nearby, the elder Amelia seized the opportunity. She gathered the blood of the fallen vampires as it pooled across the floor. By the time the unicorn returned to Arthur's side, she had collected enough to coat the entire room. Under the influence of Marcus's blood already within her, that accumulation was slowly transmuting, becoming blood she could command. Arthur sensed Amelia and the blood swirling about her, but he barely glanced. His magic had mostly replenished. He moved to a carefully chosen spot. From here, he could strike Amelia directly, and if his spell punched deep enough, reach Marcus, who was growing stronger beneath the castle. Arthur had felt the tremor of Marcus deep underground. From what he had gleaned from Damon Sterling's last words, Marcus would complete his ascension in 2.5 minutes. Arthur decided to seize the initiative and hit Marcus before the ancestor finished his empowerment. Under the fog's cover, Amelia didn't notice where Arthur had taken position. She was too absorbed in binding the blood. Arthur raised his wand. His soul eased out of his body and hovered above it. He was using soul projection in battle for the first time. He had avoided it before because leaving his body defenseless was a risk. Now, shielded by both the lightning shield and the unicorn, he could take that risk. From his ethereal vantage, he controlled his soul to draw magic from the natural world and channel it into his body. His total magical capacity stayed the same, but an enormous flow of energy burst from his wand like a cascade of fireworks. Even as his body expelled great torrents of power into the spell, the outside magic constantly refueled his stores to full. A giant sword of lightning coalesced above his wand. A thin filament of energy linked the sword's hilt to the wand at his hand, humming with raw power. Arthur steadied his projection, feeling the blades crackle in the air, ready to strike down the blood-ensnared elder and pierce the earth toward the awakening ancestor below. Magic power means that only wizards can stand at the top of the magic world. Dark clouds gathered over the vampire's stronghold, and a continuous rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. The vampires rushing in from a distance saw the omen and quickened their pace. Whatever was coming was no ordinary threat. The lightning above the castle had intensified far beyond the white mist Arthur had summoned earlier. Before Arthur's 4-meter-tall soul, a long sword of pure lightning hovered, nearly 40 meters long, shimmering blindingly. Despite the imposing height of his soul, Arthur looked tiny beneath that blade. When the lightning sword appeared, its brilliance cut through the castle's dim gloom. Currents from the blade twisted the air, and bolts of thunder kept hammering down, striking the weapon or the ground below. Amelia, hiding in a room inside the castle, heard the thunder. Even the thick fog Arthur had made couldn't muffle it. She peered out of the window and froze at a sight that made the old woman shudder. A longsword, almost as tall as the castle itself, hanging directly above. If it fell, it would come down on her head. She couldn't withstand such an attack. She didn't even pause to think about the blood barrier she'd formed. She rushed to the lower levels of the castle, resolved to flee through the underground passage if Marcus couldn't stop the strike. But Arthur saw her move. He extended both hands slowly and took hold of the sword's hilt. Pressing down, he drove the enormous blade straight through the castle. When the blade touched the masonry, brick and stone split as if they were nothing. The structure gave way like soft tofu, and debris tumbled away. The falling sword accelerated, its light growing all the more dazzling. Amelia had just stepped out when the sword cleaved through her and the blood barrier she had conjured. The lightning incinerated her body into ashes. The blade did not pause. Under Arthur's guidance, it pierced through the castle and driven deeper into the earth. The building was almost cut in two. Then Arthur released his hold. Without his control, the lightning forming the sword grew turbulent. A blinding flash burst from the rent castle, followed by a deafening roar, and the whole stronghold collapsed. Arthur had anticipated this. He had already moved out of range and only returned when the dust settled. The castle lay in ruins, and the ground around it was riddled with cracks. Arthur placed his hand on the earth and sent his magic probing downward. As a vampire stronghold, the castle had a vast underground complex. Charlotte had slaughtered most of the vampires on the surface earlier, but many had been hiding below. The Thunderblade's explosion had sent the greater part of their forces away, banished them, scattered them, or worse. When Arthur finished sweeping the ruins, only 2 vampires remained alive, a man and a woman, both crawling out of the wreckage. They were badly wounded, but already stitching themselves back together. Their regeneration was rapid, far faster than a human's, but still painfully slow compared to some legendary healers. The male vampire, hairless with pronounced bat-like features, spat and glared at Arthur as soon as he could stand. His wings were broken. He'd used them to shield himself from the explosion and paid dearly for it. "Are you Marcus, the vampire progenitor?" Arthur asked. "I am," the vampire answered, sucking in a breath. Rage and bitterness lined his face. In his youth, he had watched wizards capture his father. The memory of their power remained vivid. If he'd had a say in things now, Marcus would never have provoked wizards, but he had been forced into it. Roused prematurely, attacked by a colossal thundersword, nearly annihilated. If he hadn't used his wings at once, he would have died. Instead, his wings were shattered and his body scarred. After learning the details from Selena, the woman with him, Marcus's hatred had fed on fury. He wanted to kill Amelia and Damon Sterling, the elders he had appointed, for needlessly provoking wizards. He suspected they'd tried to stir trouble to boost their own influence and to unseat him, the elder who had always maintained a cautious line. Vampires, even with werewolf blood mixed in, could never reach the heights of a true wizard. Wizards could freely manipulate the magic inside themselves and commune with the magic of nature. Their potential was on a different plane. Even a talented young wizard, barely grown, had nearly wiped out the vampires. The gap was obscene. Marcus looked at Arthur, eyes burning, but put his anger into words. "Respected wizard, let us end this here. If you want compensation, name it, and the vampires will pay." Arthur studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You expect me to believe that?" "Absolutely. Anything the vampires possess, you may have," Marcus insisted. Arthur glanced at Selena standing awkwardly by his side. The woman's life had been altered by recent events. In name and likeness, she still matched the old tales, but many things had changed. Marcus's voice faltered with a strange pride. "Her name is Selena. To survive your attack, she risked fusing with the blood of the first vampire-werewolf hybrid. The fusion was perfect. If you require her, I'll give her to you. She can serve, as a guard, as you wish." Arthur looked at Selena. She turned slightly, a flash of resistance in her posture as if bracing against Marcus. Arthur smiled. "That's good," he said. "My first demand is that she become the queen of the vampires, the one and only queen, above the council and above the elders." Marcus's hands clenched. "You want me die?" "Of course." Arthur's voice was flat. "You say you'll honor any demand, yet your eyes still glint with hatred. I don't intend to wake up one day with a vampire progenitor at my throat." Marcus tried to keep calm, but the truth was clear. Arthur would accept nothing less than Marcus's death. For Arthur, naming Selena queen served multiple purposes. With the vampire leadership all but wiped out, Selena, the perfect fusion of vampire and werewolf blood, could become a rallying figure for a faction of vampires. If she owed her position to wizards, she would immediately become their proxy and a target for other vampires. Civil war would be the likely result. "You'll announce her as an elder?" Arthur pressed. "No, I will proclaim Selena the next head of our council," Marcus corrected, voice tight with defeat. "No," Arthur said, sharper. "Not a council elder. The queen." Marcus understood the implication. He had been cornered into sacrificing himself to keep his people safe, and even that luxury was gone. He had tried to avoid provoking wizards, but his position had been undermined from within. Facing the brutal reality of wizards' power, he finally bowed his head. Selena's resistance had been faint and half-hearted. She had never been the one who sought power among her people. That hesitation, and the fact she had not fought as the strongest Deathwalker in the front lines, suggested she would neither relish the throne nor aggressively oppose Arthur. With her as a wizard-backed queen, vampires would turn on her and not on Arthur. In short order, unless something unforeseen happened, the vampire ranks would tear themselves apart. Arthur intended to kill Marcus and install Selena as that lightning-ordained queen, a plan that both protected the wizards and ensured the vampires fractured without wiping the species entirely from the world. Marcus had no intention of groveling. He was over 1,000 years old, most of that time spent in dormancy to conserve his strength, true, but he still had pride. Accepting punishment from a boy had been the absolute limit of what he could stomach. He looked at the teenager who called himself a wizard and said coldly, "Young man, don't be reckless. Even if you kill me, you might not get out of here alive." Then he showed his power. As the vampire progenitor, Marcus's features were unnervingly bat-like. Pale, hairless skin stretched over faint blue veins like a spiderweb, long, sharp fangs, a pointed nose, and a pair of small wings that had regrown after being torn. They couldn't lift him into flight, but they did give him a burst of speed. Arthur said nothing, only lifted his wand. Hostility between wizards and vampires had been established, and eliminating Marcus, the progenitor who could lead them all, would be invaluable. Marcus charged. Unlike ordinary vampires, he had spent years absorbing the blood of wizards and magical bats, slowly changing himself. He had increased his internal magical reserve and developed the rare ability among vampires to perceive external magic. He still couldn't cast charms like a true wizard, but his blood magic was formidable, and as progenitor, he shared a natural bond with the blood of his kind. As he moved, Marcus sprayed a veil of blood mist, hot, magical, and dense enough to blind and confuse Arthur's sight and scrying. Arthur, however, was at full mana and didn't try to pick out a single target. He reached up with his wand, linked to the dark clouds still hanging over the castle, and drew lightning down. The thunder rolled through the ruins. The lightning nearest Arthur was taken by a lightning shield. Bolts that struck farther away smashed the ground instead, cutting off Marcus's approach. "Damn wizard!" Marcus spat. He'd counted on Arthur being exhausted after the earlier fighting. Instead, the boy's magic flowed as naturally as breath. Marcus had watched his father Alexander fall before a wizard, helpless, and had spent centuries trying to bridge that gap. He'd experimented on himself, let bats bite him, fed on wizards' blood, and slowly his body had changed. Now he could directly command the blood of the other vampires through the ancestral link. In seconds, he drew up every vampire corpse and bloodline corpse buried beneath the earth, shaping them into a writhing mass of blood dragons circling him. For a moment, the dragons held against Arthur's lightning. Then Arthur concentrated, shaping and guiding the lightning strikes with uncanny precision. Electric arcs danced through the airborne blood, dispersing its magic and tearing it apart. The red forms lost cohesion, their contained magic evaporated. Blood splashed back to earth and seeped into cracks. Panic showed on Marcus's face. He had no time to fight a long-range duel, couldn't get close safely, and couldn't outrun a wizard who could apparate. Desperation left him one option: go all out. He poured his remaining lifeblood into a single weapon, fusing most of the blood he still commanded into a massive blood spear, and hurled it toward Arthur while flanking to find an opening. Arthur met it head-on. He drew on most of his stored power and forged a spear of lightning, brilliant, crackling like a silver thunderdrake. The two spears bore down on each other. The lightning's arcs shredded the blood spear even before contact. When they collided, the blood weapon sheared apart. The drained blood rained to the ground and ran back into the earth through fractures. Marcus didn't stop. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, an afterimage of a figure, and launched himself with claws bared. Before Arthur even had to look, a pebble slammed into Marcus's side and sent him sprawling. Black tendrils rose from the stone's impact, coiling and binding him, wrapping him in tight, constricting cords. Arthur casually retrieved the small gem at his throat, a defensive amulet he had fashioned. It would be more than enough to blunt a vampire's assault. Marcus thrashed and spat, trying to wrench free from the shadowy restraints, but they held. "Are wizards that powerful?" Marcus rasped, eyes wild. "Neither I nor my father could stop one." "Only the strongest," Arthur said softly. "There aren't many who are stronger than me now. An ordinary wizard, chanting a spell, might have fallen to you." Arthur's voice was even, judging. "I had the advantage: instant, precise lightning, layered defenses, and an artifact ready to shelter me. Those things buy time." He studied the defeated progenitor, and unexpectedly, something like pity touched his face. "Some things you aren't born to have. Still, I'll give you a chance." Marcus's eyes flickered with desperate hope. "What kind of chance?" "When you die, you will go to another world," Arthur said. "When you get there, don't hang on and become a ghost. Move on. I give you my blessing. In whatever comes next, become something like a wizard rather than a bound spirit." The black tendrils tightened. They began to draw at Marcus's flesh, sucking and eating at his blood and body, the binding magic consuming him swiftly. Marcus gaped at Arthur, a mixture of terror and reluctant acceptance crossing his features as the night closed over him. Before Marcus could even finish his curse, he was gone, consumed by a rage that sent him out of the world. There was nothing left for him to cling to. Becoming a ghost was irreversible, and so he had no choice but to move on. Arthur tapped Marcus's corpse gently with his wand and drew out a thick, dark vial of blood. That blood was useless to most wizards. As a reagent, it was outclassed by the essences of many other magical creatures. To vampires, however, it was like a super soldier serum. For them, it was precious beyond measure, what turned ordinary fangs into monsters. Arthur had been killing vampires, but the other senior wizards reacted to the surge of magic that followed. In the Ministry of Magic in the United States, the magical exposure threat level clock had spiked to the highest setting, triggering frantic searches for the source. Ministries around the world pooled their resources. The Crystal Ball Network, developed by the top minds of the wizarding world, tracked the eruption to Eastern Europe, Romania, vampire territory. They assumed the vampires were at fault, but no vampire force should be able to generate magic on that scale. Aurors were dispatched to Romania, while ministers convened in Paris, watching the live feed through specialized crystal balls linked to the clock. The crystal ball filled with lightning and an image of Arthur. Pierre Dupont, the French minister for magic, who had been told Arthur would stay home, slammed his hand on the table and demanded to know why the boy was in Romania. An Auror whose collar Dupont had been tugging replied helplessly, "I don't know. He said he would stay." "This is intolerable," Dupont snapped. "This will ignite open conflict between wizards and vampires. Arthur Black is a historical villain." The Auror tried to be practical. "What if he has killed the vampire progenitor?" Dupont looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Do you know what you're saying? The last time he got lucky and killed a handful of common vampires. Do you really think he's the savior now? Kill the vampire progenitor? You and I together couldn't do it. A child? If he did it, I'll eat this table." There were exclamations around the table. Dupont pushed through the crowd to see the crystal ball more clearly. The image showed a spear of lightning cleaving through a spear of blood. A great vampire, the progenitor, impaled and held. The vampire sprang to claw at Arthur and was seized. Dupont, knowing the progenitor's face well, went red with mortification. He wanted, in that instant, to cast a memory charm on the Auror and wipe out the whole exchange. Cornelius Fudge, the British Minister for Magic, looked at Dupont and asked calmly, "Minister Dupont, what has happened?" Before Dupont could answer, the Auror loudly summarized, "The minister just said Mr. Arthur Black couldn't beat the vampire progenitor, and if he did, he'd eat the table." Laughter rippled around the room. Dupont ground his teeth and glared at the Auror as if the man had set him up on purpose. The Auror coughed politely and announced, "I suddenly remembered my wife is about to give birth. I'm leaving," and slipped out. He had indeed acted deliberately. He despised Dupont's obsession with appearances and the statute of secrecy. He believed the statute no longer fit a world growing ever more chaotic. A few minutes passed before the others regained their composure. Fudge managed a small smile. "This might not be all bad," he said. "Mr. Black has, well, he appears to have slain the progenitor. It could work in our favor." Fudge had always been a stabilizer, an advocate of the statute of secrecy. He also recognized Arthur's talent from the brief image. The boy could grow into the most powerful wizard of his generation, perhaps the next Dumbledore. As minister, Fudge would be gone by the time Arthur matured. Protecting him now presented no political risk. "No," Dupont shouted. "This is disastrous. Vampires were more controllable than werewolves precisely because they had a powerful vampire council. With the council wiped out by Arthur Black, how are we supposed to keep them in check?" Others chimed in. Some wanted Arthur punished, sent to Azkaban. Others argued he should be commended. The vampires started the fight, and Arthur was simply retaliating. When they asked, "Did vampires start dictating terms to wizards?" an old, white-haired wizard rose and silenced the room. "All this arguing is pointless. The outcome depends on one person, Mr. Arthur Black. In the present wizarding world, aside from Headmaster Dumbledore, who among us could guarantee they could control him?" A minister from a small Eastern European nation retorted sharply, "So what? Strength doesn't give one immunity. Grindelwald was captured. He's imprisoned. The old wizard sniffed. We all remember how Grindelwald escaped and how Dumbledore himself had to defeat and recapture him. My point is different. Suppose Mr. Black resists arrest. Would that push this talented but volatile wizard into the dark? If he does, the disturbance would be enormous. He looked pointedly at Dupont. If there is another great fire of Paris with modern Muggle communications, we will not be able to hide it. The statute of secrecy would be gone. Dupont drew a deep breath. He felt an absurd, overwhelming urge to resign then and there, to bury himself underground and flee his office. 133. The Divided Vampire Council. Arthur had no idea that the ministries of magic from several countries had convened to discuss how to handle the situation. He was busy clearing out the remaining vampires in the stronghold. Almost everyone in the castle was dead, every vampire and bloodline member except Selena. More vampires were still arriving from other places, and Baru reported that they were breaking through the traps he had set. Arthur looked at Selena and asked, "How did you become a vampire?" Selena stepped back at his attention. "Marcus turned me the last time he woke up. Whenever he wakes, he goes out looking for orphans. That's how I became a vampire." Arthur remembered that in the original story, Selena had also been an orphan, driven to find the people who killed her parents. The circumstances weren't identical, but they were close enough. He asked, "You never suspected Marcus was doing other things when he went out?" Selena nodded. "I found out years ago. Marcus killed both my parents. I wanted revenge, but I didn't have the strength." Hearing that, Arthur understood why the most powerful Deathwalkers had never attacked him. He asked, "What will you do now? Remain a Deathwalker?" Selena's eyes went vacant for a moment. "I don't know. I was brought here very young and taught only how to kill." She looked at him. "You killed Marcus and avenged me. If there's anything you want me to do, command me." Arthur considered the situation. "As I told Marcus before, would you be willing to become the vampire's king?" "Are you trying to control the vampires through me?" she asked. "Not entirely," Arthur said. "It would be good for the vampires to re-establish a council. As their queen, you would ensure they don't seek revenge on me. Beyond that, decisions are yours." Selena thought of the enemy who had murdered her family and how that enemy was now dead. She also saw how many children, like she had been, had become orphans because of vampires. With nothing left for her to do, reshaping the vampires appealed to her. It would stop others from suffering and repay Arthur for granting her vengeance. She agreed. Arthur lowered his lightning shield, took a mirror from his pack, and handed it to her. "This is an alchemical item. If you ever need to contact me, write on it with your blood. I have an identical mirror. Whatever you write on yours will appear on mine." The mirror was an item Arthur had found described in Nicholas Flamel's notes. He could only make versions that displayed text for now. Most such items required a user's magic, so Selena would need to use the magic in her blood to activate it. She accepted the mirror. "I promise, the vampires will not bother you." With their agreement sealed, Arthur mounted a unicorn with Selena and left. All the vampires in the castle were dead, and no one knew Selena had been there. As long as she could explain being away on missions, she could conceal her presence. As the strongest warrior among the Deathwalkers, she would be able to win over many vampires. After dropping her at a nearby mountain, Arthur recalled his soul guardian and had Baru take them back to France, Fleur's home. Arthur had not been gone long. He returned to Fleur's house before nightfall. Fleur ran to him and hugged him tightly. "You're not hurt, are you?" "Of course not," he said. "I'm much stronger now. Vampires can't hurt me." Soon after, those vampires who had rushed from other regions broke through Baru's obstacles and reached Brown Castle. They stared at the ruins, walls blown out, smell of burned wood, thunderclouds still hanging overhead, and realized only wizards could have caused so much destruction. Shocked and afraid, many fled. Others cautiously entered the castle. A few bold ones found a charred, electrocuted body in the rubble. A very tall corpse, about 2 meters, with a pair of small wings on its back. The arriving vampires recognized it as the progenitor of their kind. With no other sounds coming from the ruins, the outcome was clear. Everyone in Brown Castle, bloodline members, powerful Deathwalkers, high-ranking officials, was dead. The discovery set minds racing among the survivors. With the elders gone, any surviving council members stationed elsewhere saw opportunity. A number of those vampires had already won over followers while posted abroad. Now they could vie for power. After searching the ruins and finding no survivors, the arriving vampires concluded that their myths about invulnerability were false. Even with werewolf hybrid technology, they weren't unbeatable. Wizards, however, matched their legends, able to change the world at will. More vampires arrived over the following days, and Selena also returned, pretending she had come from another region. With elders and senior officials wiped out, the Vampire Council had massive vacancies, and every ambitious vampire tried to climb. Selena, already the strongest among the Deathwalkers, demonstrated her power by killing a council member and quickly gained wide support. She consolidated her position and became the sole king of the vampires, holding authority above the elders and controlling succession. Her reforms angered many violent, ambitious vampires. Those dissenters joined forces with the group that had previously been sent to Paris to assassinate Arthur and formed a rival vampire council. Civil war erupted among the vampires, exactly as Arthur had expected, and aided by Selena's active promotion. With the vampires divided and preoccupied with infighting, none of them had the will or the means to trouble Arthur anymore. Chapter 134: The Unbeatable Arthur Blake. Not long after Arthur returned to France, the various ministries of magic learned of his comeback, and the aurors they had sent to Brown Castle were recalled. Mr. Delacour was equal parts surprised and relieved. When he first heard Arthur had gone to the vampire stronghold alone, he had been sick with worry. Not only was Arthur himself in danger, but angry vampires could implicate wizardkind as a whole. Yet Arthur had prevailed, alone, and had even slain the vampire progenitor, leaving the vampire clans leaderless. For a long time afterward, the vampires would be incapable of causing trouble on a large scale. That outcome spared the ministries a great deal of trouble. Delacour, who was close to Arthur, rushed home to see him as soon as he heard. What surprised him most, though, was what he found when he burst through the door. Fleur, his daughter, was wrapped around Arthur, kissing him, right there, passionately. Arthur saw Delacour first and, embarrassed, gently pushed Fleur away. Mr. Delacour." Caught like someone with his hand in a cookie jar, Arthur could only look awkward. "You too." Delacour took a deep breath. "Forget it. I always knew this day would come. Arthur, remember to use protection in the future. It would be bad for Fleur's health if she became a mother too early." "No problem, sir," Arthur said. Delacour's eyes widened. "What? You've already started this young? Did Fleur make the first move?" Arthur hastened to clarify. "Oh no, of course not. Didn't you say in the future?" "That's better. It seems my daughter hasn't committed any further crimes." Delacour said it with mock severity, though his eyes were fond. After an awkward few minutes, Delacour took Arthur to the French Ministry of Magic, leaving a blushing Fleur behind. At the ministry, Delacour explained why he had called Arthur in. "Arthur, we know about your expedition to the vampires. We summoned you because of it." "How did you find out?" Arthur asked. Delacour gestured as he spoke. "The French ministry has a magical device, a crystal ball that can detect most places. We saw what you did with it." "I've never heard of that." "It was created not long after the Statute of Secrecy's threat level clock in the United States. Because it's easy to block, we don't use it often. We avoid widespread leaks. We used it today because the Statute of Secrecy's threat level clock hit its highest setting and we couldn't locate the source of the crisis by other means." Arthur's heart sank at that. The ministry had seen the magic he'd used and his decision to let Selena go. If word spread that Selena became the leader of the vampires, it would be easy for people to claim Arthur was secretly controlling them. That would be bad for both him and Selena. Still, Voldemort would likely return in the first half of next year. By then, the ministries would be preoccupied with far greater dangers than this. As they reached the meeting hall, Delacour added, "Arthur, don't worry. More than half of the wizards support you. Just stick to the fact that the vampires attacked you first." Arthur nodded. "I understand." Inside the hall, a circle of middle-aged and elderly wizards turned toward him. Some stared with approval, others with malice or suspicion. The look that unsettled Arthur most came from the French Minister of Magic, cold enough to cut. "You must be Mr. Arthur Blake. an old wizard said, pointing to an empty chair. So young. Come sit. Let's talk. Arthur sat. The old wizard continued, blunt and unflinching. Mr. Blake, we know what you did today. It's not an exaggeration to say that, like Albus, you inspire fear even at a young age. The gap between prodigies like you and we ordinary wizards is simply too wide. As guardians of order in the magical world, we have our reservations. I won't beat around the bush. About your slaying of so many vampires today, frankly, we aren't concerned. What we want to know is this. Will you become the next Albus Dumbledore or the Dark Lord? Or perhaps another Gellert Grindelwald? The old man did not couch his question in euphemism. Arthur didn't hesitate. I think my actions today show my inclination. I don't want the wizarding world in turmoil. What I did was a warning and retaliation against the vampires. As for the future, I expect to be an ordinary wizard who likes to stay at home and travel now and then. The old wizard relaxed. That's a relief. I get the sense you mean it. Oh, by the way, I'm Adrian Bonacud, Vice President of the International Confederation of Wizards. Albus has been occupied these past few years, so many matters fall to me. If you ever need anything, come to me. Arthur had been prepared to cause a scene if the meeting turned hostile, but Bonacud's manner was gentle and without malice. Arthur responded politely. Thank you, sir. After a little more conversation, Arthur took his leave. Bonacud seemed an old man, much like Dumbledore, difficult to be at odds with. As Arthur walked away, Pierre Dupont, the French Minister of Magic, turned to Bonacud with a frown. Vice President Bonacud, isn't this letting him off too easily? Is it really going to pass like this? A knowing smile creased Bonacud's face. The vampires are leaderless and can be confined to Eastern Europe. They won't threaten the wider magical world. Under those circumstances, does France still want to arrest Mr. Blake? I spoke to Albus. Even he isn't confident he could defeat Mr. Blake. How old is he then? Dupont asked. The assembled wizards' eyes widened. They were no strangers to the terror of Voldemort, and many had witnessed Grindelwald's power. Even if Mr. Blake hasn't surpassed Albus, Bonacud said, he's not far off. Forcing the issue risks turning a wizard with Dumbledore-like potential into the next Grindelwald. Bonacud knew what the ministry officials feared. To them, Dumbledore had been the stabilizing force who could keep a powerful wizard in check. Dumbledore's lack of willingness to intervene, whether sincere or a diplomatic excuse, meant the French ministry would have little power to arrest Arthur. Pushing him into open conflict would only make matters worse. In a time when wizards were arguing over how to amend the Statute of Secrecy and the world was stuck in a quagmire, was creating another Grindelwald really an option any of them wanted? Chapter 135, The Dark Mark. With neither the vampires nor the ministry interfering, Arthur and Fleur enjoyed a pleasant summer together. Eastern Europe, meanwhile, was in chaos. Each night the hidden vampires turned on one another. A few muggles caught blurred glimpses of the fights, but because the vampires had close ties to local authorities, the most that resulted were a few new urban legends. Selena, now perfectly integrated with the werewolves and far stronger for it, managed to suppress the rival vampire faction for the time being. While Eastern Europe was lively, the real uproar for wizards happened elsewhere. The Dark Mark appeared at the Quidditch World Cup. Arthur and Fleur weren't particularly interested in Quidditch and stayed away, but the Delacours went to the match. They reported that the area outside the stadium had been chaotic, full of wizards who seemed either drunk or looking for trouble. Somebody, no one could later agree on who, conjured the Dark Mark. The Dark Mark was Voldemort's symbol, branded on the arms of Death Eaters. When a Death Eater killed someone, they would leave the mark above the body, on the house, or in the sky. In the old days, if the mark hovered over a home, it meant something terrible had happened to the people inside. Nobody wanted to see that sign. To have it summoned in front of 100,000 wizards was to shock the whole wizarding world. The next day, the newspapers were full of it. Lord Voldemort was, without question, the most dangerous dark wizard in history. No one wanted another Voldemort, and nobody wanted the possibility that the vanished Dark Lord might be returning. Arthur, reading the reports, felt a chill despite himself. A single symbol had already driven even wizards in France into panic. Some were stockpiling supplies as if to flee. 3 days after the incident, Arthur returned to Britain with his two little wizards. Hogwarts was about to start. Fleur gave him a reluctant kiss goodbye. With the Triwizard Tournament opening in October, she wouldn't be at Hogwarts until a month into term. Arthur didn't leave the Thunderbird at Black Manor. He stored it in the Room of Requirement, which could hold vast spaces of mountain and water and was off-limits to other wizards, very secure. The only practical drawback was food, but that was easy. The Hogwarts kitchens, staffed with house elves, could keep quiet. At most, only Dumbledore would know. On the train, Arthur ran into Draco, whom he hadn't seen in a while. Draco was effusive. "Arthur, I've heard big news. This year's going to be a lot of fun. Want to hear what it is?" Arthur played along. "Of course. What's the big news besides the Triwizard Tournament?" Draco, having put his trunk down, changed the subject. "The Quidditch World Cup was spectacular. It's a pity you missed it. The Ministry actually thought Potter, the so-called savior, might have cast the dark mark. That cracked me up." Over the past few years, Arthur had shown powers that made Lucius Malfoy cautious about involving Draco too deeply in anything tied to Voldemort. The Malfoys always skated a line. Lucius publicly stood with Voldemort, but privately hedged his bets. He was convinced Voldemort wasn't really gone, but he also wanted to be on the winning side when the Dark Lord returned. Lucius hoped that, if Voldemort rose again, Arthur would be grown and either an ally or a rival. Arthur, an orphan from a dark family who'd never studied the dark arts, had not taken Voldemort's path, which suggested he might not side with the Dark Lord. That possibility, combined with Dumbledore's influence, made Lucius want to keep ties to both camps. So while Lucius remained an elder Death Eater in name, Draco, as Arthur's friend, was kept close to Arthur. Thus, whichever faction won, the Malfoys could claim some protection. Freed from the family's pressure, and with Arthur's gentle influence, Draco had grown less proud of Death Eater ideals than he once was. He now saw Death Eaters as terrorists led by a madman, and felt a faint shame that his father had joined them. In his view, groups like Dumbledore's Order or even Grindelwald's cause looked far more impressive than a mob that murdered and left the dark mark as a calling card. So Draco teased the mark mercilessly. At that moment, Harry and his friends passed the compartment. Draco hadn't shut the door properly, and he spotted Harry immediately. Every time he saw Harry, he seemed compelled to needle him. "Hey, savior who conjured the dark mark, are you planning to bring you-know-who back as our savior again? You probably don't remember much from when you were a baby, but if it happens, you could write a book like Lockhart and let everyone know how you became the savior." Mentioning Lockhart, long since exposed as a fraud and in this timeline dead at Arthur's hands, was meant to imply Harry was another fraud, stealing glory he didn't deserve. Harry and his friends understood the jibe at once. Ron slammed the compartment door open and snapped, "What rubbish are you talking about? Harry couldn't have put up that mark." Over the summer, Ron had shot up in height. He was now almost as tall as Arthur and a good head taller than Draco. Seeing Ron, Draco was momentarily taken aback and gaped, opening and closing his mouth. Only when Harry climbed aboard did Draco recover, sneering, "Why do you care? Did I mention you, thick-headed Ron Weasley?" "How is it not my business? Harry's my best friend," Ron shot back. "Heh, Potter hasn't said a thing and already you're leaping to his defense," Draco said. "A good dog rushes out to protect its master when the master's attacked, doesn't it? The Weasleys having someone like you is a disgrace to your family." 136. The Defense Against the Dark Arts, professor who's more like a dark wizard than a dark wizard. Ron, enraged, lost his temper the moment Draco spoke. He'd been Harry's friend since the first year and was fiercely loyal, but to a friend, not to a master. In recent years, Harry had shown even brighter than Ron, and many of the younger students, Draco included, treated Ron as nothing more than Harry's sidekick. After all, every story seems to have a supporting character to handle the ordinary tasks. With Ron's broad frame beside Harry's slimmer one, it was easy for others to draw the same conclusion. Furious, Ron swung a punch at Draco. Draco's pupils narrowed. As a chaser, his reflexes were excellent. He stepped back and raised an arm to shield his face. The punch never landed. Arthur rose from his seat and caught Ron's outstretched fist. Thanks to his naturally powerful build and the effects of his unusual lightning magic, Arthur's strength, speed, and reflexes were exceptional. He outmatched Ron in every way and blocked the blow with ease. You? Ron scowled, wrenching his hand free. Black, are you getting involved in my fight with Malfoy? All these years, Arthur had stayed out of their quarrels with Draco. And since they'd learned that Arthur's uncle Sirius wasn't a Death Eater but had been on Dumbledore's side, their view of Arthur had softened. Slytherin didn't necessarily mean dark. Arthur spread his hands. Of course not. Potter is your friend, and Malfoy is my friend. I look out for my own. Malfoy insulted you. You can insult him back, or report him to a professor and let them deal with him. But you don't hit him. He glanced at Harry, who had his wand concealed behind his back, and added with a wry lift of his chin, Of course, wizard duels are an exception. If you apologize to settle it, you can always duel for stakes. Seeing Arthur stand up for Draco cooled Ron's temper. His father and brothers worked at the ministry and knew more about Arthur's summer exploits in Eastern Europe than the papers did. They understood Arthur was not someone to take lightly. Even so, Ron ground his teeth as he stared at Draco's smug expression. Malfoy, he said, don't get too cocky. One day you'll get what's coming to you. I don't think Harry cast that dark mark. It was your father. You were at that game, and one of those masked, black-robed figures had to be him. Draco paled for a moment. He knew Lucius had attended that gathering, but he wasn't about to admit it to Ron. Don't talk rubbish, he snapped. I'll sue you for defamation. How dare you slander my father? Well, weren't you slandering Harry earlier? Ron shot back. I wasn't. Draco jabbed a finger at Harry. Wasn't it the ministry that came for you that night? I saw a ministry official questioning you, even trying to arrest you and take you back. They only stopped because someone else intervened, didn't they? Everyone fell quiet. What Draco said was true. If not for a senior ministry official, Barty Crouch, speaking up, they might have been taken in. Draco smirked, savoring the point. Now you've got nothing to say, do you? Hermione stepped forward. That only proves we were suspects. There's no real evidence linking us to the dark mark. Besides, they didn't arrest us. Who are you to decide who the culprit is? Come talk to us once you graduate and become an Auror. With that, she tugged Harry and Ron away. Draco sauntered to the compartment door and closed it with a smug snap. Ha, he muttered. Aurors, only a fool would be one. Back on the train, Draco turned to Arthur, who had sat back down, and eyed him enviously. Arthur, I didn't realize you'd grown so much this summer. You were taller than me before, and now you're a head and shoulders above. Did you eat something special? Arthur smiled, shrugging like an amiable giant. Eat less snacks. Sleep more. Maybe you're just not done growing yet. At Hogwarts, it was time for the traditional welcome feast to introduce the new staff, an autumn event that had become routine lately. This year, there was only one new appointment, the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. After the houses were sorted and the students filed into the Great Hall, Dumbledore stepped forward onto the dais and announced a surprise with theatrical regret. I am sorry to inform you all that the House Cup Quidditch tournament will not be held this year. His voice carried regret, but his face was all smiles. The students gasped and began to protest. Voices rose, angry and incredulous, until a thunderous boom sounded at the doors of the Great Hall. The doors flew open, and a man with a cane and a small hip flask strapped at his waist limped in toward Dumbledore. Every student stared. Arthur's gaze was no different. The man looked singularly fearsome, more than some imagined Dark Lord. If someone had to choose which of two figures was darker by appearance, many would have chosen him. His face was a map of scars, as if dozens of cutting jinxes had never been mended. One eye was ordinary. The other was a massive blue, wandering eye set in his socket. It rolled and swiveled constantly, showing the white around it now and then, and the effect was unnerving enough that many students ducked their heads. Dumbledore greeted him warmly. Allow me to introduce our new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Professor Moody. Silence filled the hall. Nobody applauded. Nearby, Draco leaned toward Arthur and whispered, This one's no better. Probably a violent drunk who goes berserk after a few drinks. Everyone says Hogwarts can't keep a stable Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Liars, werewolves, drunks, everything. The only thing we haven't had is you-know-who himself. Dumbledore had expected that the students would be prickly about their new defense against the dark arts professor, Alastor Moody. He had not interfered. A good teacher, he believed, would win them over by the quality of his lessons. Moody was one of the ministry's most formidable aurors. Dumbledore had no doubt he would manage the class and teach the students how to protect themselves. He cleared his throat and went on with the announcement he'd been making before. "We will not be holding the Quidditch match this year," he said. "Next month, Hogwarts will have the honor of hosting a most exciting event, the Triwizard Tournament." A few students who normally enjoyed history of magic cheered, but most had only a vague memory of the tournament from class. Dumbledore explained. The Triwizard Tournament was founded by the three great schools of Europe, Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang, over 700 years ago. Each school selects a champion, and the three champions compete in 3 tasks. The one with the highest total score is the winner. He went on to give a brief history. The tournament was held every 5 years and rotated among the schools. After a century of brutal contests and heavy losses among champions, it had been halted for several centuries. With the ministry's cooperation, the time was now considered right to restart it. "We have taken extensive precautions this summer to ensure the safety of every champion," Dumbledore added. He mentioned a few procedural rules, which left many students confused, but when he announced the prize, 1,000 galleons for the champion, the Great Hall erupted. Other details paled beside that sum. 1,000 galleons was a fortune, more than many wizards ever amassed in a lifetime. For students, it was the kind of money that could set them up after graduation. "I want to enter." "Me too." Hands shot up across houses. Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw. Faces shone with eagerness. Dumbledore raised a hand for silence, but then his expression turned slightly regretful. "I understand your enthusiasm," he said. "However, the participating schools and the ministry have agreed that contestants must be at least 17 years old. Some tasks are too dangerous, This rule is meant to prevent further casualties and to avoid jeopardizing future tournaments." A chorus of groans swept the hall. The rule meant only 6th and 7th years could sign up. Younger students had no chance. And because the tournament was held every 5 years, this group of 3rd and 4th years would almost certainly never have another opportunity before they graduated. Arthur and his friends in their 4th year would miss both this competition and the next. They could only watch. "This is just aimed at you, Arthur," Draco snarled, clenching his fists. "You're not 17, but who here could beat you? If there were no age limit, Hogwarts champion would be you." Arthur patted Draco's shoulder. "It's only a competition. If they made me champion without any challenge, where'd the fun be? And besides, it's not like I can't compete." "What do you mean, you can't?" Draco blinked, then a sly smile crossed his face. "Oh, I get it. You'll bribe the judge who chooses Hogwarts champion, right? Don't worry, my father has connections. He'll know the judge." Arthur stared. "I never said there was a judge to bribe. It's possible the selection won't be a simple duel. You don't know the method yet. You'll find out when they announce it." Word of Arthur's summer confrontation with the vampire stronghold had slipped into the papers. Not the whole story, but enough to stir speculation. Many students assumed that if Arthur were Hogwarts champion, the school would certainly win the tournament. That rivalry with the other schools mattered more than inter-house squabbles. Still, Arthur's statement that he wouldn't sign up left them with nothing to do but train. After the announcement, everyone who met the age requirement, and many who did not, threw themselves into practice. No one knew how champions would be chosen. It might not be a duel at all. If they improved now, they might stand a chance of being picked. Even if they didn't win the 1,000 galleons, being a Hogwarts champion would be a rare, brag-worthy honor. While the school buzzed with new determination, Draco sidled up to Arthur with something on his mind. Arthur, stroking the heads of his 2 Thunderbirds, looked up. "What is it? Tell me straight if you want my help." "It's not that big." "Remember," Draco said, fidgeting. "I want you to teach me something, how to become an animagus." Arthur's eyebrows rose. "An animagus? Why would you want to learn that?" "My father wants me to learn useful defensive skills," Draco said. I looked through some books, and becoming an animagus seemed useful. He opened his mouth to show Arthur a small, dark green leaf tucked between his teeth. I've had it in my mouth for over a month, he added, as if that explained everything. I'm used to it, Arthur stared. Learning to become an animagus was notoriously difficult and dangerous. The paperwork was only the least of it. He hadn't expected Draco to pick such a troublesome, complicated magic to learn. Chapter 138. Draco might be a good wizard in the future. Learning to become an animagus takes a very long time, and sometimes, if one is unlucky, it can take years. The payoff is modest, and prolonged transformations can leave serious consequences for the wizard. Time spent mastering animagus could often be better spent learning other, more useful magics. That's why Arthur and many other wizards never bothered. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been only 7 registered animagi at the ministry in the 20th century. Even allowing for a few who didn't register, the number wouldn't be high. The learning process is brutally exacting. The first step is simple to describe and brutal to execute. You must keep a single mandrake leaf in your mouth continuously for a whole lunar cycle, from one full moon to the next. You cannot swallow it. You cannot remove it. If the leaf leaves your mouth, you start over. Everyday activities like eating and drinking make that step its own trial, and the later preparations are even more delicate. Any mistake sends you back to square one. That's one big reason so few people take on animagus training. Draco said he'd already kept the leaf for over a month. That meant he'd failed once and was now on his second attempt. Faced with Draco's determination, Arthur didn't try to stop him. No problem, he said. I know what you need. My 2 thunderbirds aren't fully grown yet, but they can change the weather and bring on a thunderstorm. One of the stages of learning animagus requires a thunderstorm, and storms are notoriously capricious. They can take weeks, months, or longer to arrive. During that waiting period, at sunrise and sunset, the student must point their wand at their heart and recite the incantation, Amado, Animo, Animado, Animagus. Miss a single day and you start the whole process again. Wizards have ways to hedge against that luck. Go to places where storms are frequent, or as Draco planned, create a thunderstorm with the help of thunderbirds. After Arthur agreed, Draco kept odd hours like Arthur did, out early and returning late, rarely sleeping in his dormitory. Arthur used the time to prepare nests for the thunderbirds in the room of requirement. The small Hogwarts Arthur had created was surprisingly spacious, with a stretch of ground as large as parts of the Forbidden Forest. The 2 young thunderbirds were placed there. After hatching, they didn't need elaborate nests, just a dry, sheltered place to sleep and roost. This particular conjured room was connected to the outside of the castle. Day and night passed there as they did outside, and if it rained on the grounds, it rained there too. Arthur made simple nests with a few spells and then watched them grow. With ample food, the thunderbirds grew quickly. Zeus's wingspan was now nearly 2 meters. He stood taller than Arthur and seemed to bulk up visibly even overnight. Hera was smaller and far more aloof, regal and cat-like, uninterested in attention except when food was involved. Zeus, by contrast, behaved like an over-affectionate bird. He fawned over Arthur and fawned over Hera, which earned him frequent pecks and smacks from the more dignified sister. Arthur liked Zeus anyway, and could stroke him whenever he wanted. Time flew while Arthur raised the birds. It was already late September, and the Triwizard Tournament in October was approaching. Draco, returned one evening. He had taken the mandrake leaf out a few days earlier, when the full moon passed. In a small crystal vial, he had mixed a strand of hair, 7 days dew that had not touched sunlight, a death's head hawkmoth pupa, and a full bottle of saliva. He'd buried the vial under moonlight, then chanted the incantation at sunrise and sunset for 3 days. Finally, he'd felt the telltale faint second heartbeat in his chest. He'd reached the last stage and needed a thunderstorm to complete the transformation. Draco led Arthur to a wide hollow in a tree near the Forbidden Forest. "This is where I buried the vial," he said. Arthur looked around. The hollow was roomy enough for Draco's first transformation. He set down the box he'd been carrying and released Zeus and Hera. He ruffled their feathers and said, "When I tell you, fly up and bring on a thunderstorm." "Wait a moment, Arthur." Draco's voice faltered and his face went pink. "There's still one person who hasn't arrived." "What's wrong?" Arthur asked. Draco's posture stiffened. He waved both hands as if to dismiss any assumptions. "It's not what you think. She's just a good friend. I invited her to learn animagus with me because my father bought a lot of the materials, and I thought she might want to try. I didn't force her or anything." Arthur was already puzzled by Draco's hesitation, and his confusion was answered before he could press further. A sharp flash of red came running from the direction of the castle. Red robe, red hair. Unmistakable. Ginny Weasley. Draco had flirted with her before, and she was Ron's sister. Arthur's mind put pieces together. No wonder Draco had been awkward when he first met Ron on the Express, and why he'd stopped taunting the Weasley family about money. Draco hadn't just been idle cruelty. He'd been courting. Arthur tried not to smile. Draco, blonde and well turned out and used to getting what he wanted, had clearly managed to charm Ginny. The future clashes with Harry and Ron were looking more complicated by the day. Draco had the look of someone who, once he found his footing, might turn into a very different kind of rival, half charming, half infuriating. A boy who could just as easily be the center of attention as James Potter had been in his day. Arthur pushed the thought aside and focused on the task. The Thunderbirds beat their enormous wings and rose into the sky. Dark clouds gathered at their bidding, humming with power. Lightning knifed the air, thunder rolled in, and Draco steadied himself against the first drops of rain, wand pointed over his heart. The last stage had begun. 139, two newly born illegal animagi. Ginny jogged over to them, cheeks a little flushed. She wasn't sure whether it was from the run or from Draco. She glared at Draco for a moment, then greeted Arthur. Arthur didn't probe into Ginny or Draco's thoughts. Ginny wasn't his daughter, and she seemed the more dominant of the two. He looked at the slightly awkward Draco and said, "Since everyone's here, let's begin." "Okay, let's start quickly," Draco agreed at once. As soon as the Thunderbirds took to the sky, arcs of electricity danced across their bodies. Because of certain mutations, they could summon lightning and heavy rain more quickly and on a larger scale. Within minutes, the weather began to change. A sudden strong wind rustled the branches, and Draco grabbed Ginny's hand, pulling her behind him and whispering something. Thick, dark clouds gathered overhead, lightning flickering constantly within them. Arthur raised his wand and cast a transparent umbrella to shield them, then interrupted Draco and Ginny's hushed words. "Draco, you two can get ready. The storm will be here soon." "We'll go in first," Draco said, and slipped with Ginny into the hollow of the tree. If Arthur hadn't been there, Draco might have started much earlier. A rumbling peal of thunder came, and the rain began to pour. Inside the tree hollow, the two of them started digging up the spot where they had buried the crystal phials. Because they had correctly completed the animagus preparations, the liquid in the phials had turned into a red potion. Draco and Ginny's faces lit with excitement. This was the final step. If everything went well, they would be animagi tonight. They drew their wands, pointed them at their hearts, and intoned the final transformation spell together. Amato, Animato, Animagus. Then they drank. A sharp, burning pain shot through Draco's body, and at the same instant an animal, his animal, flashed into his mind. A peacock, the same form as his Patronus. Pain accompanied by change. His clothes seemed to merge with his skin, his body shrinking. In place of Draco stood a peacock, entirely white, save for a small tuft of yellow feathers on its head. Ginny's transformation was similar in sensation, but she became a small red pony, only about half a person's height, clearly not yet fully grown. Perhaps in a few years, her pony form would grow large enough to ride. Both were experiencing their first transformations and were wildly curious, pacing back and forth to test their new bodies. There was one disappointment. In animal form, they could understand human speech but not speak it. For more complex conversation, they would have to switch back to human form. Arthur called Zeus and Hera down. The two little wizards, soaked through from the rain, simply shook themselves and sent the water flying in all directions. Arthur reached out to touch Zeus's feathers, imagining how waterproof robes could be made from such plumage. When the birds were older and shed, those feathers could be used. Seeing Draco as a peacock in the tree hollow, Zeus darted forward and pecked at the bird's head, curious about this little wizard, who looked so like him and eager to make a new friend. The sudden peck left Draco dizzy, as though he'd been concussed. Struggling to stand, he reverted to human form, sat down, and tapped Zeus gently on the head. Watching Draco switch between bird and human in an instant made Zeus even more inquisitive. He circled Draco eagerly, as if trying to understand how Draco could change at will. Ginny, who had also switched back, felt odd after being a pony. Accustomed to walking on two legs, 4 felt strange. Still, the form had clear advantages. She was fast in that shape and could carry another person for short distances. Draco's peacock was mostly decorative, good-looking but of little practical use. Animagi turn into ordinary animals, not magical creatures. Even with a wizard's enhancements, their animal forms gain only modest boosts in speed and strength. Most genuine magical creatures could still deal with an animagus in animal form without much trouble. A white peacock couldn't run well or fly convincingly, and its conspicuous coloring drew attention. Prolonged transformation could even cause the animagus to take on some animal habits, as if touched by a small curse. But regardless of limitations, at least both of them had succeeded. After that night, faint hoofbeats were sometimes heard in Hogwarts Castle late at night, and Draco's face grew more frequently lit with a different kind of happiness. An eager, almost lascivious grin that made him look rather uncharacteristically childish. Another month passed. By the end of October, a notice was posted at the entrance to the Great Hall. Triwizard Tournament representatives from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang will arrive at 6 p.m. on Friday, October 30th. Afternoon classes will end half an hour early. Students are requested to return their bags and textbooks to their dormitories and assemble in front of the castle to welcome our guests, then attend the welcome feast. After the notice went up, the castle was put through a thorough cleaning. The whole place seemed refreshed, and every conversation among the young wizards turned to the Triwizard Tournament. The likely champion for Hogwarts was the hottest topic. The favorite was Cedric Diggory, the Hufflepuff sixth-year prefect. Cedric had been blessed by fortune. He came from a well-off family, and his father worked at the Ministry of Magic, which gave him advantages when considering a future at the Ministry. It was even the Ministry employee who tried to confront Harry during the discovery of the Dark Mark at the last Quidditch World Cup, who turned out to be Cedric's father. In addition to his pedigree, Cedric was one of the few at Hogwarts who could rival Arthur in good looks. His heroic presence on the Quidditch pitch had won the attention of many witches. Tall, rich, and handsome, he met every expectation people had of a Hogwarts student. His sunny, outgoing, big boy charm made him the most popular male student at Hogwarts without much competition. It was only that his eventual fate would be tragically ordinary. He would later be killed by the newly resurrected Lord Voldemort, and his girlfriend would go on to be Harry's. 140. Ginny speaking well of Draco. It was the evening of October 30th. The heads of the 4 houses stood in the courtyard before the castle, greeting the students of their houses. Hogwarts' renown in the wider wizarding world had always eclipsed that of Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, thanks to Dumbledore, so wizards from abroad rarely came to study at Hogwarts. Still, a strong rivalry existed between the 3 great schools, and the Triwizard Tournament made that rivalry plain. The Hogwarts faculty were determined not to be shown up by Beauxbatons or Durmstrang. Night had fallen. A bright white moon hung overhead, cutting the cold into the students' bones. The students from the 4 houses were lined up in the front courtyard, waiting to welcome the visiting schools. The chill made them fidget and chatter until Dumbledore announced, "If I'm not mistaken, the Beauxbatons representatives have arrived." At once the students snapped to attention, trying to spot the newcomers. Arthur, standing in the crowd, saw them before most, a team of winged horses drawing a vast carriage through the sky. The winged horses were Beauxbatons' specially bred flying steeds, so the carriage must carry their delegates. Arthur watched Dumbledore step forward to greet them. Dumbledore had sensed them a few seconds earlier than Arthur had, proof that even with the boost of soul magic, Arthur's soul strength still lagged far behind Dumbledore's. But that was to be expected. Soul strength was not the same as physical fitness. Dumbledore had lived well over a century. It made sense that his power was greater than Arthur's. Moments later, 12 winged horses, each as large as an elephant, pulled a huge pink and blue carriage down through the clouds toward Hogwarts. When they landed, a gust from even one of those horses could have knocked dozens of students off their feet. The carriage door, bearing the Beauxbatons crest, opened slowly, and a woman over 3 meters tall stepped out. Dumbledore went forward, kissed the hand she offered, and said, "My dear Madame Maxime, welcome to Hogwarts." "Dumbledore, I hope you are keeping well," she answered. A sound like a distant conch horn swelled from the lake. A whirlpool opened on the water, and a mast rose from its center, followed by the skeleton of an old wooden ship. A middle-aged man in a fur coat strode onto the deck and called, "Hey, Dumbledore, my old friend, how are you?" "Excellent, thank you for your concern, Professor Karkaroff," Dumbledore replied calmly. Karkaroff hustled over and took Dumbledore's outstretched hand in both of his, bubbling with enthusiasm. "Come, Dumbledore, let me introduce you to one of my students, Victor Krum. He's my finest pupil. He'll be Durmstrang's champion for sure this year." At the name Victor Krum, a wave of excitement rippled through the Hogwarts students. Krum was one of the best seekers in the world, the player who had caught the golden snitch at the Quidditch World Cup 2 months earlier, and many of the students had thought he was already a professional. They surged forward, eager for autographs and a glimpse of the famous player. Draco, standing next to Arthur, was no exception. "Oh my, Merlin's broom! Krum's a Durmstrang student? I thought he'd turned professional," Draco exclaimed, scrambling for pen and paper. "Arthur, shall I get his autograph for you? I'll get one for you too." "I don't even like Quidditch," Arthur said flatly. Draco slapped his forehead. "Right, Ginny likes Quidditch. I'll get one for Ginny." Arthur watched Draco rush off, bewildered but not surprised. Draco's blonde looks had always made him oblivious to anything but a pretty face. The crowd swarmed Krum and left the Beauxbaton students with plenty of space. Arthur moved toward them. Though the Beauxbaton students wore hoods and flowing robes that concealed much, Arthur recognized Fleur at once. Not because of the hood, but because a small figure stood beside her. Only Fleur's younger sister, Gabrielle, would be likely to accompany her from Beauxbaton. Fleur smiled when Arthur caught her eye and took his hand, letting him lead her toward the great hall. Gabrielle, ignored, came up and pried their hands apart, grabbing one of each and standing between them with her cheeks puffed. "Hey, what about me? Arthur, you're stealing my sister again. Unless you give me that little bird toy you played with last time, I won't forgive you." When all the students had filed into the great hall and taken their seats, Dumbledore rose and said, "Good evening, students and honored guests from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang. Welcome to Hogwarts. Enjoy the feast. The selection of the Triwizard champions will begin at the end of the meal." This feast was livelier than most. Only a couple dozen students had come from the other two schools, but Hogwarts pupils were wildly curious. With a famous Quidditch star in their midst, almost everyone's attention drifted to the Durmstrang table. Draco used his status to invite Victor Krum and his companions to sit at the Slytherin table. Arthur had escorted the Fleur sisters to Slytherin as well, and the Beauxbaton students naturally followed their older sister to sit beside Fleur. For a while, the Slytherin table was packed, and the other houses glowered as if the Triwizard tournament were a Slytherin-hosted affair. Over in Gryffindor, Ron had already shuffled Hermione over to make room, intent on hosting Krum, but in an instant he saw Krum being led to the Slytherin table by Draco. He snapped, "I bet Krum has people fawning all over him wherever he goes. And look, Malfoy's sucking up to him, trying to worm his way in. I wouldn't trust him for a moment. Where's Krum going to sleep? He can have my bed. I'll sleep on the floor." "Humph," Hermione snorted and rolled her eyes. Ginny, sitting behind Ron, spoke quietly. "Don't say that, Ron. Mum always says not to judge people harshly." "What?" Ron barked. "Ginny, that's Malfoy. He's rotten to the core. Why would you defend him?" "There's no one who's born evil," Ginny said, a little flustered, leaning on their mother as a shield. "Remember what Mum says about Dad. He was naughty as a child, but he grew up. Draco, Malfoy, hasn't bothered you lately, has he?" "Oh, for Merlin's sake," Ron grumbled. "Mum says so many things every day I can't remember them all. Just, Malfoy's not a good person." He stared at Draco and Krum laughing together at the Slytherin table, his face full of displeasure. He didn't notice Ginny watching the Slytherin side with a complex, conflicted expression, an expression that was a little like heartbreak.